When I opened the hotel door, my fiancée's lover was standing behind her, half-dressed. He looked me dead in the eye. She whispered, "It's not what you think." I never believed I'd be the kind of man who stumbled into betrayal. My life had always been ordered, calculated, built on routines and plans that left little room for surprises. That's probably why I was so quick to trust Madeline Carter when she walked into my world. She had the kind of smile that disarmed people, a confidence that made others lean in. Where I was steady, she was spontaneous. Where I preferred structure, she thrived on chaos. At least, that was how I saw it back then. We had been together for nearly 3 years when I decided to propose. By then I thought I knew every curve of her personality, every story she carried, every dream she whispered late at night. Her parents adored me. Her friends teased her about how lucky she was, and I convinced myself that the rough edges, the occasional late night out, the strange secrecy around money, were just quirks of someone who lived differently than I did. When she said yes, the engagement consumed our lives. We were pulled into fittings, tastings, meetings with planners, constant chatter about guest lists and flowers. I threw myself into it because I believed it mattered. The idea of building something with her was enough to silence the doubts that sometimes crept in. But what I didn't realize then was how carefully she had laid out her own plan, one that would have gutted me if I hadn't walked through the wrong door at the right time. It started on a Friday afternoon. Madeline told me she was staying overnight at a hotel downtown because she had an early meeting with a cousin visiting from out of state. She spun it casually, like it wasn't worth scrutiny, and I barely gave it a second thought. She left in a rush, suitcase in hand, telling me not to wait up. That night, I was supposed to be working late on a client pitch, but the meeting was canceled, leaving me with an unexpected block of free time. I drove past the hotel where she said she'd be staying, almost on impulse. The idea was innocent enough. Surprise her with a drink, prove that I could be spontaneous for once. That decision ended up unraveling everything. The hotel lobby smelled of polish and faint perfume. I asked the front desk for her room, pretending I was her fiancé bringing flowers, and the receptionist smiled as if it was romantic. She gave me the room number, and I rode the elevator up with a strange thrill in my chest. I knocked once, then pushed the door open. What I saw wasn't flowers and cousin chatter. It was Madeline standing in the center of the room, half-dressed, her blouse hanging open. Behind her, a man I'd never seen before leaned against the wall, shirtless, with a calm expression that didn't match the situation. The silence felt endless. She stammered, trying to cover herself, whispering something about it not being what I thought. But the words barely registered. What cut through everything was the man's eyes, steady, almost daring me to react. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't afraid. He looked at me like he had already won. I didn't scream. I didn't demand answers. I didn't throw anything. I just stepped back, closed the door, and walked down the hall as if I had accidentally walked into the wrong room. But my hands were shaking, my stomach felt hollow, and every step felt heavier than the last. On the carpeted floor of the hallway lay a small hotel card, probably dropped from the man's pocket. I picked it up without thinking. It had the initials of a company embossed in gold. That one detail, as insignificant as it looked, became the thread I started pulling until everything unraveled. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. I replayed the look on his face, the weak panic in hers, the way the air in the room felt staged, like they hadn't even bothered to hide. My first instinct was to confront her, demand answers, force the truth out of her. But as the night stretched on, a different instinct took over. Confrontation would give her control, give her the chance to spin another story, another excuse. Silence, on the other hand, gave me time. That weekend she came home smiling, pretending nothing had happened. She kissed me like the hotel room had never existed, told me about her cousin, and asked about my canceled meeting. I nodded, played along, and filed away every detail. The next day, I met my childhood friend Logan for lunch. He had built a career in property finance and knew more about shady business dealings than most. I slid the hotel card across the table, pretending I had found it near my car. He picked it up, frowned, and told me it belonged to a holding company with a reputation for cutting corners. More importantly, he recognized the initials from a man named Damian Cole, someone he had seen at networking events. Logan leaned back and said I should stay away from him. Damian had a history of exploiting women, attaching himself to their lives, draining what he could before moving on. That was when I realized the man behind Madeline wasn't just some stranger. He was a predator who had chosen her, and she had let herself be chosen. I spent the following weeks pretending nothing had changed. Madeline continued her late nights, her secretive phone calls, her endless spending. I watched with new eyes. The things I used to dismiss as quirks now looked like calculated moves. She was building a life that had no space for me in it. except as a foundation she could strip when the time was right. I started taking mental notes of every irregularity. The shopping bags hidden in the trunk of her car. The sudden appearance of jewelry I hadn't bought. The odd charges on our shared account that she explained away with vague stories. Each detail painted a larger picture of someone I didn't recognize. One night, I followed her when she said she was going to meet Sophie, her best friend. Instead of the cafe she mentioned, she pulled into a bar on the far side of the city. I stayed in my car and watched as Damien slid into the booth beside her, his hand casually resting on her knee. They laughed, ordered drinks, leaned close enough that the truth became undeniable. I should have confronted them right then. But again, I didn't. I drove home instead, carrying the image like a stone in my chest. I realized then that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. If I exploded, I would be the angry fiancé, the jealous man who couldn't handle it. But if I waited, if I gathered everything quietly, I could turn their arrogance into their downfall. The first real step came when I checked our accounts more carefully. Buried among the regular charges were credit lines I hadn't opened. Debt was stacking up in her name, hidden behind her smiles and reassurances. I realized she had been using my stability as cover for her recklessness. The wedding wasn't about love. It was about safety, about securing access to everything I had worked for so she could burn it without consequence. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, piecing together the fragments. The hotel room, the smirk, the debts, the hidden bags, the lies told with a straight face. It wasn't one mistake, one lapse in judgment. It was a structure she had built brick by brick, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I didn't tell her what I knew. I didn't ask questions. I smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and played the part of the doting fiancé. But inside, something colder had taken root. She thought she was building her future on my back. She thought I was blind enough to walk her straight into comfort while she laughed behind closed doors. I wasn't going to give her that future. Not long after, I started documenting things quietly. Not in a detective sense, but like someone creating a roadmap. Receipts I didn't throw away. Conversations I remembered word for word. Patterns of her absences. It wasn't about proving anything to a court or to strangers. It was about reminding myself of the truth when her lies tried to soften the edges. The more I watched, the more I noticed Damien's presence bleeding into our lives. Small gestures, a coat draped over her chair that wasn't mine, a bottle of expensive cologne that lingered in her car, whispers on the phone when she thought I was asleep. He wasn't just an affair. He was a shadow pressing closer, threatening to step into my place if I let him. But that wasn't going to happen. By the time a month had passed, my silence had become something she no longer questioned. She believed she had me wrapped so tightly that I wouldn't notice if the walls caved in. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't the one blind anymore. I was waiting, preparing, collecting every piece until the picture was too sharp for her to blur. The day I found the second key card in her purse, this time without any attempt to hide it, I knew the game had shifted. She wasn't even cautious anymore. She thought the victory was hers already. That was the moment I decided her story wasn't going to end the way she imagined. She wanted a husband who would secure her debts, shield her from her reckless choices, and give her a future she hadn't earned. Instead, she was going to face something she never expected, a silence sharper than confrontation, a patience colder than rage. When I opened that hotel door, I thought I had seen the worst of it. But it was only the beginning. The betrayal wasn't a moment. It was an entire design, and I was finally ready to dismantle it, piece by piece. I didn't explode after the hotel door moment, and that was what saved me. Instead of becoming the fool screaming in a lobby, I became the man watching every thread unravel until I could pull them all at once. By then I understood that Madeline's betrayal wasn't one mistake, it was architecture. She had been designing it carefully, and if I wanted any chance of protecting myself, I had to learn the entire blueprint before tearing it down. I'll be honest, keeping quiet was harder than anything I've done in my life. Every time she smiled, every time she touched my arm and asked about dinner, I saw that half-dressed man behind her, smirking. But pretending meant I could move in silence, and silence gave me the advantage. The first lead came through Sophie. She was Madeline's best friend, loud and restless, the kind of person who would drink too much on a Tuesday and tell you the secrets she swore to keep. I didn't trust her completely, but I knew if Madeline was careless around anyone, it was Sophie. So I invited her for drinks one evening under the pretense of asking advice about engagement gifts. Halfway through her second glass of wine, Sophie leaned across the table and laughed. She told me how lucky Madeline was, how smart she had been to lock me down, and how much she'd benefit once the wedding was over. She didn't spell it out clearly, but her tone said everything. This wasn't just about love. Madeline was treating the marriage like a safety net, and Sophie, in her drunken haze, didn't realize she was giving me a glimpse behind the curtain. I kept my expression calm, nodding along, even pretending to be flattered. Inside, my chest was tightening. Every confirmation burned, but it also sharpened me. A week later, another piece fell into place. Madeline told me she was meeting Sophie at a cafe. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then drove across town and parked outside. From the corner booth, I saw her already there, but not with Sophie. Damien had joined her, sliding into the seat with the ease of someone who belonged. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough when they raised their voices. She told him I was boring but reliable, and that once the wedding papers were signed, everything we needed would be under her name. He urged her to speed things up, saying he had other plans waiting. When she leaned forward and kissed him, I felt something inside me snap, but I didn't move. I just sat there, listening, memorizing every word, until they left. That night, I looked at her differently. She came home smiling, talking about girl time with Sophie, and I played along while imagining the sound of Damien telling her to hurry. Around that time, I began checking our finances more closely. What I found made me sick. Credit lines had been opened in her name, thousands in debt attached to boutique shopping and casinos. She hadn't been careless. She had been reckless, stacking obligations I never knew existed. The realization hit me. She wasn't marrying me for love or even comfort. She was marrying me for survival. She thought the marriage would bind me to her, and my stability would absorb her chaos. I stayed up half the night combing through records, staring at the numbers, the signatures, the holes she had tried to cover. The more I dug, the clearer it became. If I didn't act, I would end up legally tied to her collapse. Logan was the only person I trusted with the truth. We met in a quiet diner, and I showed him everything I'd uncovered. The debts, the overheard conversation, the hotel key card. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every page. When I was done, he leaned forward and told me Damien wasn't just some random parasite. He had connections with loan sharks, small-time investors, people who used women as conduits to drain families. If Madeline was tangled up with him, it wasn't just an affair, it was business. That conversation changed my entire perspective. I realized I wasn't just a fiancé betrayed. I was a target. And she wasn't just reckless, she was complicit. After that, I began moving in silence. I pulled deeds out of joint accounts, shifted money into trusts she couldn't touch, and froze the line she thought she controlled. When she asked why her card suddenly stopped working, I told her it was a bank error. She believed it. Or maybe she just wanted to believe it. But while I was protecting myself, she kept getting bolder. She would leave her phone on the counter, and I'd catch a flash of Damien's name before she snatched it away. She would shop with Sophie for entire afternoons, then come home smelling of cologne that wasn't mine. The arrogance was astounding. She thought I was too blind, too soft, to notice. The worst confirmation came from Caroline, a woman I met entirely by accident. She was sitting at a bar, sipping her drink, when Logan recognized her and introduced us. When I mentioned Damien, her face hardened. She told me she had dated him 2 years earlier. He'd done the same thing to her, charmed her, convinced her to take on debts, then drained everything he could before disappearing. Her voice cracked when she said she was still paying off the mess he left behind. Hearing her story was like staring into a mirror. Madeline wasn't his first, and she wouldn't be his last. But I could make sure she was the one who brought everything crashing down. Madeline's parents, Harold and Diane, were still in the dark. They adored me, saw me as the man who could keep their daughter steady. They called often, asking about the wedding plans, offering to help with costs I didn't need help with. Every conversation made my stomach turn because I knew the truth would ruin them. They had no idea what their daughter was plotting. I didn't want to humiliate them, but I couldn't let their trust trap me. That's when the idea of a larger confrontation began to take shape in my mind. If Madeline wanted to use me as her lifeline, I would cut the rope in front of everyone who mattered. The pieces were falling into place. I had Sophie's drunken slip, the cafe conversation, the debts, Caroline's testimony, Damien's reputation. I had already started pulling my finances out of her reach. What I needed now was timing. Madeline still kissed me goodnight, still spoke about wedding favors and table settings, still laughed about our perfect day in the future. Every word was another brick on the wall she was building, and every smile was another nail in her coffin. She thought she was so close to winning, but I was already building something of my own. A plan that would leave her standing alone, stripped of everything she thought she was entitled to. The night that sealed my resolve came unexpectedly. I found another hotel card in her purse, tossed carelessly between receipts. She hadn't even bothered to hide it anymore. She thought I was blind, thought my silence meant weakness. She had no idea that I was already watching her house of cards tilt, waiting for the right moment to push. As I held that card in my hand, I knew the game had changed. I wasn't just surviving her betrayal anymore. I was preparing to end it. And when it ended, it wouldn't be with shouting or violence. It would be with something far colder, far sharper, consequences she could never escape. By the time another month passed, I had shifted from shock to calculation. The anger was still there, burning beneath the surface, but I kept it contained. I smiled when she smiled, nodded when she gushed about the wedding, and even pretended to care when she handed me brochures for honeymoon resorts. Every second I acted like the same man she thought she had fooled. I was one step closer to pulling the ground out from beneath her. I wasn't planning on screaming or throwing plates. That kind of revenge burns fast and dies quickly. What I wanted was something permanent. I wanted her to stand in front of everyone who believed her lies and watch the story collapse, with nowhere left to run. The first step was tightening the noose around her finances. By then I had quietly shifted all significant assets out of reach. The house deed, the investment accounts, even the joint checking she thought was hers to dip into, all locked. I opened new accounts in a trust under my name alone, moved shares of my company out of the joint portfolio, and cut her credit lines. She didn't notice right away, but cracks began to show. One afternoon she came home frustrated, tossing her purse on the table, saying her card must have glitched again. I played dumb, suggested she call the bank, and she dropped it after a sigh. Her debts were starting to catch up to her, though she hid it under shopping bags and forced laughter. I knew the collectors would soon circle, and without me as her shield, they'd land directly on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Damien's presence was growing bolder. He no longer bothered to stay in the shadows. One night, I caught sight of them leaving a downtown restaurant together, his arm casually draped across her shoulders. She didn't see me, but I saw her clearly, laughing freely, her head tilted against his chest, as if she wasn't engaged at all. My blood boiled, but I didn't make a scene. Instead, I followed them to a bar where they met friends. I sat in a corner booth, far enough not to be noticed, and listened. Damien mocked me openly, calling me the quiet wallet. Madeline laughed, agreeing that I was boring but stable. They clinked glasses and spoke about how easy things would be once the wedding was done, once the papers gave them access to my accounts and property. Hearing her plot with him in such casual tones hurt more than anything else had. But it also hardened my resolve. I pulled out my phone and recorded their conversation. I didn't need to use it immediately. I just wanted it in my pocket, ready for when the time came. The second step of my plan came through Caroline. After our first meeting at the bar, I stayed in touch with her. She was hesitant at first, nervous about stirring up the past, but when I explained what Madeline and Damien were doing, she agreed to help. She sent me screenshots of old messages, proof of his scams, photos of them together during her downfall. The pattern was undeniable. Damien latched onto women, drained them financially, then discarded them when they had nothing left. I organized everything into a neat folder, digital and physical copies. Every receipt, every transfer, every photo was dated, labeled, and ready. I wasn't planning to hand it to the police. No, this was meant for something more devastating. Then came the invitation. I told Madeline I wanted to host a dinner before the wedding, a small gathering of people who mattered most, her parents, Sophie, a few close friends, and Damien, under the pretense of thanking him for some business help. She thought it was charming, even praised me for including her friend in our circle. She had no idea I was setting the stage. In the days leading up to the dinner, I made sure everything was ready. Logan helped me secure the venue, a private dining room at a restaurant where the staff owed him favors. I set up a projector, disguised as part of the decor, ready to display evidence with the press of a button. I arranged seating so everyone would have a clear view of Madeline. The night of the dinner arrived. Madeline dressed elegantly, beaming as if she were already the center of the universe. Her parents walked in first, Harold shaking my hand firmly, Diane hugging me like her own son. Sophie came next, tipsy already, whispering about how she couldn't wait for the wedding. Finally, Damien arrived, smug and casual, offering me a handshake like we were business partners. I shook it without flinching. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Drinks flowed, dishes were served, laughter filled the room. Madeline held my hand under the table, squeezing as if to remind me how perfect we looked together. Then I stood up. I cleared my throat and said I had a small announcement. Everyone fell quiet, expectant. I pulled a stack of papers from my jacket, freshly printed prenup agreements. I laid them on the table in front of Madeline. Her face froze. Her parents blinked, confused. I explained calmly that in light of my business growth, I wanted to ensure the marriage started with full clarity. The prenup, I said, protected both of us. Harold immediately nodded, agreeing it was sensible. Diane smiled, telling Madeline to sign. After all, what's the harm if you truly love him? Madeline's smile cracked. She stammered about trust, about how this wasn't romantic, but her parents' pressure left her cornered. Damien shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this twist. I let her squirm for a moment before pressing the button on the small remote in my pocket. The projector lit up the wall behind me. At first, a series of text screenshots appeared, messages between Damien and Caroline, outlining his schemes. Then came bank transfers, dated photos, and finally, the video I had recorded at the bar. Madeline's own voice filled the room, laughing about how boring I was, how easy it would be once the wedding secured her future. The room went silent except for her recorded laughter. Her parents' faces turned pale. Diane covered her mouth, shaking her head. Harold pushed his chair back violently, muttering about being embarrassed in front of everyone. Sophie looked like she might vomit, tears welling in her eyes. Damien stood, trying to leave quietly, but I blocked his path long enough for everyone to see him slink away. Madeline erupted. She screamed at me for ambushing her, accused me of spying, insisted it wasn't what it looked like. But the evidence on the wall behind me said otherwise. Every word out of her mouth dug the hole deeper. Her mother slapped her across the face before storming out. Her father followed, shouting that she was no longer his daughter. Sophie muttered something about betrayal and left in tears. By the time the projector dimmed, Madeline was alone, standing in the wreckage of her own lies. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply gathered my papers, thanked the restaurant staff, and walked out. Behind me, she screamed my name, demanding I listen. But I didn't turn back. That night, as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. The plan wasn't finished. The consequences were still waiting, but the first strike had landed. She wanted a perfect wedding. Instead, she got a room full of people watching her mask fall off. And the best part? The real fallout hadn't even begun. When I walked out of that dinner, I didn't feel like a man who had won. I felt like someone who had closed a book for good. The people who needed to see the truth had seen it. Madeline's mask had been torn off, not by my accusations, but by her own laughter and the evidence she thought would never surface. I had kept my silence, and it had been enough. The drive home was strangely calm. My hands rested steady on the wheel, my chest free of the tightness that had lived there for months. I wasn't chasing revenge with anger anymore. I was watching a slow collapse I had only nudged in the right direction. Her calls began that same night. At first they came every hour, then every few minutes. 10 by midnight, 20 by sunrise. I never answered once. The voicemail stacked up, beginning with denial, shifting into sobbing apologies, and finally ending in threats. I deleted them all without listening through. My silence wasn't just for her, it was for me too. It was a boundary she couldn't cross anymore. 2 days later, her father, Harold, showed up at my office. His shoulders slumped like a man who'd aged a decade overnight. He apologized for her behavior, apologized for what I had endured, begged me not to cut ties with the rest of their family. I told him calmly that I carried no anger toward them. They had been deceived as much as I had. But I was finished with Madeline, and she would carry her own burdens. He nodded with a heavy expression, muttered that she was no longer welcome under his roof, and left without meeting my eyes again. Damien disappeared almost immediately. Caroline later told me she'd heard he was already charming another woman in another city, leaving Madeline stranded without the man she thought would replace me. Her frantic attempts to reach him were met with silence. He didn't even grant her the courtesy of a final goodbye. She had built her escape plan on him, and he had cut the rope the second it got heavy. It didn't take long for her debts to start clawing at her. Letters arrived demanding payments. Collectors left messages in growing numbers, and soon the weight of her secret life became impossible to hide. Without me to shield her, every creditor came straight for her. She showed up at my house one night, pounding at the door until my neighbors peeked through their curtains. When I opened it, she looked destroyed, hair a mess, makeup streaked, her eyes swollen. She begged me for help, promised it had been a mistake, swore she still loved me. I told her, quietly, that she had made her choices and now she had to live with them. Then I shut the door. She screamed, kicked the doorframe, cursed my name loud enough for the whole street to hear. But I didn't open it again. My silence cut deeper than any argument could have. Even Sophie abandoned her. Word of the dinner had spread quickly. The recording had made its way around their social circle. Every laugh, every word about how I was nothing more than a wallet. Friends who once adored her stopped responding, stopped inviting her anywhere. Sophie told others she had been betrayed too, that Madeline had dragged her into lies she hadn't asked for. Whatever bond, they had dissolved overnight, leaving Madeline stranded with no allies. Her mother tried, for a short while, to soften things. Diane called me, voice trembling, asking if there was any chance I could forgive. She said young women sometimes made foolish mistakes. I didn't argue. I just sent her copies of the debt accounts, the evidence of years of recklessness hidden even from her parents. The next time I spoke with Diane, her voice was colder. She said her daughter had shamed them beyond repair, and they couldn't keep cleaning up her messes. The spiral accelerated. Eviction notices were posted on her apartment door. Collectors started showing up in person, banging on her walls, leaving threats if she didn't pay. That was when the calls reached their peak. One night, I woke up to see 37 missed calls stacked on my phone. The final voicemail was her sobbing, choking on her own breath, begging me to answer, promising she'd change, promising anything if I would just save her one last time. I deleted it before the message ended. The last time I saw her was outside the courthouse. She looked like someone I barely recognized, smaller, thinner, her clothes hanging loosely, her hands clutching a folder of documents she waved in front of a creditor. Her voice was high and panicked, her eyes darting around for sympathy. Then she saw me. For a moment, her face brightened, as if she believed I would step in, the way I always had before. She called my name. I kept walking. Her voice broke as she shouted again, but I didn't turn. There was nothing left between us anymore. Not love, not trust, not even hatred. Only silence. People talk about revenge as if it's fire, as if it's loud and violent. But I learned the real thing is quiet. She thought I would collapse, beg, forgive, keep carrying her debts and her betrayal. Instead, I gave her nothing. No rescue, no forgiveness, no fight. Just silence. When I opened that hotel door months before, I thought the worst thing I could see was her half-dressed with another man. I was wrong. The real worst thing was realizing how long she had been building that betrayal, brick by brick, in plain sight. And the only answer strong enough to tear it down was walking away and letting the collapse bury her on its own. My silence was the sharpest weapon I had. And in the end, it destroyed her. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.